really, really exciting piece of legislation introduced a couple of weeks ago now, I think, called the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill. It's a really historic piece of legislation. It's the result of an awful lot of work by Jim in the department and from other ministers in the department. And most importantly for us on the call, it's a really long-standing kind of area of priority for the Co-op Party. I think Jim and I were talking with Joe Fortune about this, and I think Joe said that the first time he campaigned on a community right to buy, which we'll talk about as one of the things in the bill, was like 2007 or something like that. Really long-standing piece of campaigning work, and that has resulted in a bill that's going to be going through Parliament from September. So we're really, really lucky to have the minister who's going to be taking that bill through. Lots of you on this call will know him, Jim McMahon, who is Minister for Local Government in MHCLG, Housing, Communities and Local Government, but is also the chair of the Co-op Party and a great friend to us and a long-standing champion. So it's really, really exciting that we're going to have him. He's going to speak a little bit about the bill, particularly about the community empowerment aspects, which are the ones that are perhaps like most of interest. But we'll then have a little bit of a chat about it and we'll open it up to questions. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to pass over to our friend Jim.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. Can I thank you and also Izzy for putting this together today? This meeting, I think, came from the NEC, sorry, the AGM that we had, where there was clearly a lot of interest around devolution, around reorganisation, and it was just about getting to the point where kind of more of the detail was coming forward on what the context of the bill was. So we've had roundtables in Parliament that, again, Caitlin was kind enough to arrange with people who are in this space in terms of community ownership and community empowerment. But we did want to make sure that we had a forum, I guess, where we could meet as cooperators and just go through the kind of key elements of the bill. Naturally, a English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill will have a huge section on devolution and local government, and it does. And I'll maybe just kind of canter through some of those elements. But I do want to probably focus a bit more on community empowerment and also the community right to buy, which are kind of core cooperative party projects, campaigns that we've run for quite a long time, and where we're now using this moment in government to move legislation so that those can be enacted in law. And I think it's quite an interesting kind of point in our journey a year into this new government, where we all applied the test really, which is, can we make this Labour government a distinctly Labour and cooperative government? And just the sheer number of cooperators that are operating at cabinet level, as ministers of state, as parliamentary undersecretaries, I think means that you will kind of feel that there is kind of very co-op stuff coming through, but not just that it's in our area and it's something that we might be interested on, but you would be able to track it back to a campaign that has been run in the past where we have really kind of put that stake in the ground. The starting point for the English Devolution Bill, as it was a manifesto commitment from the Labour Party, essentially to address the power imbalance that sits in our country, where there is far too much power being hoarded in the centre, generally Whitehall and Westminster, at the exclusion of whole communities and our economy. And the consequence of that is, I think most people in most places feel completely disempowered when it comes to affecting change in their places. They often think that the system is stacked up against them and isn't on their side. And I think really, even with the best will in the world, there is no lever that can be pulled in Whitehall or Westminster that can achieve the type of change that we need across the country. What we need to do is to build that change from the ground up. And that's very much the spirit of this bill. And really, in the space of 13 months, we have gone from a manifesto to a white paper that we published in December, now to legislation being tabled for its first reading and second reading due on the 2nd of September. And I think that is significant. I mean, one, it shows how important this is to our department and to Angela Rayner as the Deputy Prime Minister, that we have prioritised the slot that we have in terms of moving legislation for this issue. Now, some of it is just necessary. We do want to see devolution widened out across England. We certainly want to see devolution deepened with far more financial powers for combined authorities and for mayors, far more powers so you don't have to keep going back to the Secretary of State for permission on a raft of different issues, and also a rebuilt local government. because there is no devolution in England that works without a rebuilt local government sector to support it. And really, the inheritance that we had was pretty shocking. I mean, it was bad, and we knew it was going to be bad, and it was everything that we expected it to be, frankly. There was over 900 sets of accounts that weren't even submitted for auditing. That was tens or hundreds of billions of pounds of public money that we could not account for. The consequence of that meant that the whole of government accounts could not be signed off by the National Audit Office. And that is a badge of shame for our department. I do not want to continue much longer. So within the first couple of weeks, we took steps through the audit backstop to require local authorities to repair some of that. And don't worry, I'm not going to get into all that. But it's more to say that the structural problems in local government go way beyond anything that I think superficially we have seen before. Structurally, it needs to be simplified. We need far more ability to move money around the system. And so we are doing that through the bill, and that will give us the powers to move money around what is currently the two-tier system by essentially kind of ending the two-tier system and the creation of new unitary councils. That will free up around a couple of £1 billion, we estimate, that can be moved from the district council level to county council services as they currently are for adult and children's. But we recognise that if we were to do that in a snap for the local population, I think they would see a disruption to services. So we need to do that as part of reorganisation. We also want to make sure that there is simplified governance for local authorities, where currently it is a patchwork. I won't go into that in detail, but it does mean moving to the leader and cabinet model. And of course, that requires scrutiny functions that will support it. But the thing that was really in my mind was kind of 13 years as a councillor, which is kind of some of the best experiences of my life in terms of feeling like I'm actually achieving change that people can see and feel, and is making a difference. And I'm here in the ward that I represented for 13 years still in my family home. But I do reflect that kind of 14 years of austerity has really hit hard at neighbourhood services and neighbourhood budgets. And I think for many people in large parts of England, they kind of open their front door, they walk onto the streets, and they see disrepair. They see that through litter that maybe isn't being picked up, or fly tipping that's accumulating, or potholes that aren't repaired, or a street light that has been reported but hasn't been sorted, or the local park that just isn't the standard that it used to be when Labour was last in government. And I think there is a huge onus on us to start rebuilding those neighbourhood services. But I do want to use it as an opportunity to rebuild also the status and the power of what it is to be a ward councillor. I think that for quite a long time, ward councillors haven't been respected. I think actually they've been spoken down to. They've been put in the kind of eager volunteer space without recognising that they control budgets of hundreds of millions of pounds. But more than that, actually, that they are kind of leading the charge in terms of that kind of community response as well. And I think giving more power to ward councillors to be the community conveners so that they can cooperate with their local community and they can produce good decisions together, I think is definitely where we need to be getting to. So the bill will introduce a responsibility for the Deputy Prime Minister, although it will be me, to bring forward regulations to have a level of community and neighbourhood governance across England. That doesn't cut across town and parish councils where they exist. Of course, they have a role to play, and many of them do make a difference. But I do believe that we have to mainstream localism in every local authority in England if we want to achieve the change that we know the country needs. But just to kind of move to kind of some of the kind of very practical things that are definitely in kind of co-op space. Firstly, of course, neighbourhood governance is there, but I do want to say that we will kind of focus on what they ought to be called and what they should look and feel like. But I think there is a bigger piece of work here on what they do and how they make decisions and how they co-produce that decision-making process. What I wouldn't want, and I think it would be a sign of failure, is if we create a new level of bureaucracy and committees that lock themselves away from the local communities and don't co-produce decisions together with the community. That's certainly not in the spirit of cooperation. But actually, I don't think it's harnessing the potential that we know exists in every community in the country. So there's a huge opportunity there to kind of rebuild what it is to be a local councillor and give them the dignity and the respect and the resources that they need to make change happen, but very much put them in that convening space so that the community is very much front and central too. But when we think about community and what's been lost over 14 years, I do think, and maybe I feel it acutely in Oldham a bit more, where most of the last decade and a half has been spent campaigning to stop something being lost. And I kind of really struggle to see, other than a kind of emergency response in terms of food bank operations or clothes banks or community spaces that have been kind of made to pop up somewhere because that's where the need is. Almost every other community kind of motivation has been a call to arms because we're due to lose something again. And that could be at the bank, it can be a post office, it can be a community facility like a library or a youth centre, or you name it. And I do think that whatever we do to councils, if we don't root councils in place and community and to see the community in the way the public does, then we're missing something here. And I do think for many people, their local high street is a barometer of whether things are going well or not. And when I walk down Oldham, and our council in Oldham actually does a fantastic job in terms of regeneration and focus on that investment, and there are so many great projects. But we all know the condition of the high street in terms of the direction of retail. We all know that the pub industry, in particular, is under a lot of strain. We all know what the high street banks are doing in terms of walking away and turning their backs on our high streets and town centres too. And we also know that there are some landlords who don't have a stake in the place where they own property, and they would quite happily just sit on it and allowing it to deteriorate and have an impact on the high street that's negative. And so we want to change that almost a community right to bid, which is what the Localism Act actually does provide at the moment. It's not a community right to buy, it's just the opportunity to put your hand up, to a genuine community right to buy. And what that means in practice is a genuine first refusal, allowing 12 months to get that package together. It's allowing that 6 month window to be able to get your kind of financial planning in place rather than being rushed to the point where it's just not reasonable for a community to organise in a tighter timetable. It's expanding the definition of what we mean by a community asset to include economic and cultural assets. It's also expanding the range of assets that are in scope. I think the last 14 years have been very difficult, but I also would say that there are just some assets where they just ought to be on the list. We shouldn't wait for a community organisation to have to rally round to recognise as governments, whether we're at a national level or a local level, that those are important to the community. And so we are bringing forward in the legislation proposals to have an automatic registration for sporting assets of community value. And that can be anything from a football stadium to a cricket ground, to a bowling green, to you name it, whatever is in that category. And we will provide a schedule of what facilities are in scope. But we don't just want to stop on the playing field or wherever it may be, or the court. We also want to make sure that the ancillary facilities are also included for protection as well. That could be a car park, it could be a changing room, it could be a clubhouse, because we recognise that actually when people view their local sporting ground, we recognise that communities actually use them far more than just the activity that takes place on that pitch and on that court, and that wider facility has to be protected as well. And so we'll do that. I think there's an interaction here between neighbourhood governance and giving councillors as a conveners in the community that job of work to go around and actually generate that list of community assets so the protection is there on day one. Because what that does in the new legislation, which isn't currently in place, is to put the onus on the owner to notify the local authority. There are loads of examples here around the country where an asset may well be on the list, but the owner doesn't even bother informing the community or the local authority even that the asset's being disposed of. In some areas, the property doesn't even go on the open market. It's transferred without any consultation whatsoever. Actually having in law a legal requirement for the property owner to notify the local authority formally, and then for the local authority to notify the community that's registered it, becomes a really, really important protection that then triggers a 12-month period to be able to organise. So there's quite a lot in there. I think it does complement the other work that we're doing around the high street as well. So a few months ago, I moved legislation on business rates, which is a bit of a double-edged sword when we usually talk about property tax. But this could be game-changing because we're moving away from that temporary COVID relief that was a cliff edge and was always going to come to an end to think about, well, what's the new world of how we tax fairly property tax when it comes to business? And I would say, if you speak to most small businesses on the high street that are running retail, hospitality and leisure, they will say that business rates after rent are the things that really they find difficult. And so the legislation that we moved will bring in a permanent reduction for retail, hospitality, and leisure for those small businesses on the high street. And it will also include, by the way, multiple retailers like the Co-op, but also Specsavers or Boots or Home Bargains or wherever it may be, recognising that those are now very key anchors in terms of supporting the high street and bringing footfall in that then support the independent retailers as well. You'll probably be aware that we've got the multi-billion pounds, nearly I think £4 billion of investment into communities, and that's about kind of really empowering local communities and neighbourhoods. And it's all part of that plan for change to really kind of own the investment that's coming in their area. Alex Norris in our team is leading the charge on that, and you will find as a fellow cooperator that there is a lot, not just about what we want to do in terms of getting that investment out the door, but the how we do it becomes really important. Almost the worst outcome, I think, as a government recognising that times are quite tough in terms of public expenditure, is to spend billions of pounds and for the public not only not to realise that we've done it, but even in some cases to resent the fact that we have done it because we have done it in a way that hasn't included them and put them in charge. And so there's quite a lot here that is about how we do what we do to make sure that we bring people with us and they feel as though they have the power in this. It's probably as close to actually taking back control being meaningful rather than a slogan on the side of a bus that we're going to get. But I think this is really important in terms of rebuilding that kind of confidence and faith in politics to be able to make change in a positive way. So all being well and with a fair wind, we'll come back after the summer recess. I'm sure all recharged, subject to the weather in Shropshire when I go away for my holidays. And I think it's the second day back. So the 2nd of September, we'll be in for second reading. We're then going to move to the evidence session straight away before the Labour Party conference. And then when we come back, I think we're into 6 or 7 then committee stages in terms of line by line amendments that we will take. And we are taking that process as you'd expect, really, which is that if a good idea comes and we haven't considered it in the bill, then we have no shame. We will absolutely take somebody else's good idea if it makes the bill better, more robust, and it makes it deliver what's intended to do. So do kind of take the time to read the guidance that comes out with the bill and any suggestions, including those on the call today, that you have, will certainly kind of take back and reflect.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim. I think that's such a good overview of like not only what's in this bill, but all of the context that sits around it, all the other stuff that's going on. Jim will have heard me say this before, and other people on the call would have heard it as well, which is that something that we've spoken a little bit about as part of our Community Britain campaign is the idea that communities have sometimes been seen as an afterthought or like not a serious sort of prospect for politics. And when you say that, people will then say back to you, well, how do you make it serious? Which is a good question. And I've always said back that one of the things is you need a really strong and like extensive policy platform. And I think that's what the Labour government is really building, and Jim is really at the forefront of that. We've got a couple of questions coming through. I've got a couple of questions for Jim first, so do send them in the chat to me. I've got some really great ones already, which we'll turn to. Before we do, I wanted to ask you, Jim, about kind of like I guess the historic nature of the bill. Like we did a little bit of research in our team, and we found that this bill is the first UK bill to have community in the title for I think more than a decade, and the first to have empowerment in the title ever in history, at least based on our, if anyone, please don't fact check me, but at least based on our research. And that in itself, before you even get into the provisions, is a really sort of significant moment. Obviously people on this call and yourself, cooperators, have always had that kind of community value at the heart of what we do. But I was interested in your thoughts, I guess, on why this focus on community empowerment has become part of a Labour government agenda. I'd love to say that it's like to do with the total influence of the Co-op Party and the Co-op Party team, but I suspect it might be about something more than that as well. Would love to get your thoughts on that.
I mean, I thought, Caitlin, the point you made around communities sometimes can be an afterthought for quite a lot of politics, I think is really important. I think it's probably a bit worse than that in practice because the way that the previous government had this kind of bidding war culture, if you wanted to get any sense of a very limited resource. You had to basically put yourself up against your neighbour and fight for it. And what that fight meant was not that you kind of put your best foot forward. Maybe there's always a place for that in terms of kind of how you fairly distribute a limited resource, but you are encouraged in the system to constantly talk about how desperate you are, how deprived your place is, how negative your most recent or your history has been. And what it very rarely does is talk about the social capital that exists and why you think you've got the foundation to build something stronger. And what we're trying to do with all this is to kind of break up that centralizing model where you have to go to the Secretary of State all the time for permission. And that kind of starts at quite a high level. That can be anything from a mayor that wants to introduce a supplement on business rates. That's currently then they would have to go up to the Secretary of State and then they would sign it. It won't surprise you at all to know that actually the Secretary of State often doesn't sign these things. It comes down to ministers like me to sign. And I have lost count of the number of parish council bylaws that I've signed off. And I'll be honest, I look on a map to find out where some of these little parks are that I'm being asked to prohibit cyclists from going through. But it is a ridiculous, if you think about the work that we've got on, £400 billion local government pension scheme reforms that we're undertaking, local government reorganisation affecting a third of England, devolution, the fair funding review, the audit review, the standards review, you name it. Oh, but by the way, just have a view about whether cyclists should or shouldn't kind of hop off their bike travelling through this park. Kind of why is all that important? Because it reflects over a very long period of time that our country has been centralised by kind of legislation after legislation and by the culture that exists from the centre. Now, some of those go back so long that they are ridiculous. I mean, the trawl of nearly 100 that we've done so far, because we're going through quite a lot of legislation, means that if you want to sell meat or logs for burning on the streets of Leicester, you've got to ask Angela Rayner for permission. I don't know if people know that, but it just shows you in a way just how far and how nuanced some of these goes down to. And we do need to change that. So we're doing a complete review of retained Secretary of State powers alongside thinking about what financial freedoms devolved and local authorities might be able to have too. But if all we did was to create more and more empowered mayors, and all we did was to create maybe fewer after reorganisation, but more empowered councillors and councils, we have failed the test. Because when we go door knocking, as we all do, and we say to people, how are you getting on? We are still going to be met, one, with a cynicism about politics, but almost like a fatalism about the future of their place, that change just can't happen and it can't be achieved. And I don't think we'll get a hearing. But I do think we've got a window of opportunity, with the privilege that we have of actually being in government after a decade and a half, to do things in a different way. So I think we have a bit of a strategy for decentralisation. We certainly have a strategy for devolution. We now need to bring in that localism, community empowerment strand. The framing, Caitlin, that you put about Community Britain is where all this, I think, is going to be. I think all the politics is going to come as almost like a magnet to kind of Community Britain as a purpose of politics. And I think if we can kind of root this agenda in that type of politics, then I think we'll get a hearing, and with a fair wind, we'll also build support for the movement too, which obviously is why we're in politics, to kind of build out, not just hoard.
Totally. And thank you for the kind words on Community Britain. It's like obviously a big focus for us, and lots of people on the call will have contributed to it, which and as of you, Jim. I had two more questions, but I'm actually only going to ask one because I've got loads of questions coming in on the chat, and please do keep sending them through. I'm going to go through them in the order that they came, if that's okay, and we'll get through as many as we can. I wanted to ask about the community right to buy specifically, and you sort of touched on this already, but and actually I Jim has said this to me before about this kind of save versus build kind of mentality in politics, and like a lot of Labour MPs who were around before Labour was in government will totally have understood that mindset of like, we're saving this, we've got to save the post office, we've got to save the swimming pool. It's sort of like constant scarcity mindset. And it wasn't until you said it that I thought about that shift into like, what if we can give communities more rather than less, right? And I think that's a really powerful narrative. So I guess on community right to buy, it's as we've said, it's a long-standing policy priority for people on this call. What is it, do you think, about community assets and the need to like have more of them that is more important. I mean, in Community Britain, we talk a little bit about the role of shared spaces, shared community spaces in response to like loneliness or poverty or radicalization or like whatever it may be. And I'm sure you've got like lots of thoughts about that from a constituency perspective as well. But community assets seem to have such a strong role in this bill and actually in other stuff that the government's doing around Plan for Neighbours, as you said. Just interested in your thoughts on the why that is of such value for a Labour government, and then we'll get into people's questions and I'll take them in groups of three. Thanks, Jim.
Well, I've kind of told the story before, so it won't be a long story, don't worry. But I do think there's something about going back to kind of where cooperation came from and what it built. We kind of look at cooperation today and we think about kind of the big societies in terms of the co-op group and the other societies around the country in terms of their retail face. And then we reflect on the good kind of community work and grant giving work that they do and the rest of it. And that's important in today's context. But where they came from were local neighbourhood cooperatives, where local people decided that they weren't going to get ripped off. They wanted a better deal, and they thought, well, far better that we do it ourselves rather than wait for somebody else to come and do it for us. And where I am today in Oldham, we had a range of them. We had the Oldham Equitable Society, the Failsworth Industrial Society, and others, where they didn't just build a shop, they built a movement. They built the farms that provided the produce, the butchers, the laundries, and they used essentially their economic power that they were able to build over time to start building their social power. And so in my own town, they were the people that bought the first ambulance before the NHS even existed. They bought a residential care home, a respite centre for old people who had to go to Blackpool and have a bit of a break by the seaside at that time. They built the town's first library. And, you know, J.R. Klein's former Labour leader, way back when, born and bred Oldhamer, learned his enthusiasm for reading at the Co-op library in Oldham. And this kind of social progression that we built over time wasn't actually a response to save something because it never existed. There was never a free public library in Oldham before the Co-op library opened. There wasn't an ambulance before the ambulance was bought. And I just say all that because I think we underestimate sometimes our power and ability to organise in our communities and to create something new. And so I do think we have to make a transition from that kind of spirit of kind of the emergency service going into rescue and to save to actually thinking about the work that we're doing more foundationally to build capacity in communities. Because actually the communities that have been most hit by austerity aren't the middle class communities with agency or where there are political activists who are willing to take on that charge. It's actually the most deprived communities where they were more reliant on public services, where they were taken away. And I look across the road to Limeside, which is one of the actually the most deprived council estate in my constituency, and look at the loss. The police post has gone from there. The neighbourhood housing office has gone from there. The youth centre has gone from there. The library has gone from there as well. But what do they have left? They had basically a ramshackle, and they would say this themselves, old football ground where the clubhouse had burnt down. And it was in complex ownership, and it was basically ready to be cleared and bulldozed before this local group stepped in to say, but it's all we've got left. And they took that, and it's now, I think it's something like 6 women's teams play there. Hundreds of young people play football there every week. It's got a boxing club in there for Anthony Crowler, a local boxer here in Oldham that's taking young people off the streets. In the area, by the way, that's had 4 Section 60 stop and searches for knife and gang crime. Is taking young people in to a safer environment off the streets. And it's going to be the family hub for the estate as well now that money's coming in for revenue as well. And so we have shown that actually communities can build, but I'll be honest and say they have done that despite the system. They got scant support from the previous government in terms of the community ownership fund to actually be able to produce facilities that were safe and they could expand the use of. And so I do think that we need to think differently about how we give, I don't know, that kind of wider wraparound support in our communities as well. So I do think kind of that switch from the emergency service going into save to the proper community builders as part of that Community Britain becomes really important. And I, by the way, consider everyone on this call who has views on this to be their own community builders. And I think there's something about how we roll out that power and that kind of movement, really.
And there'll be, I think, much more to come from us as a party on that point, and how we can sort of help empower and upskill people to make the most of this. Like I think we've always said, and we talked about this, Jim, there's sort of like get like winning the political case and getting to the point where there's political opportunity feels like we're there or thereabouts now. And then it's like, how do you make the most of that and not let that moment pass you by? And so with it, we've got to do both at the same time. I've got loads of questions. I'm going to take them in groups of three. Like we're not going to get through everyone, but we're going to try and do as many as we can. So the first, and I'm doing them in the order they came to me. So please rest assured, I'll get to you hopefully. The first thing, some of these are very technical, and we have many councillors on the chat, I'm sure, who know far more about this than I do. But luckily, we have the expert with us as well. So some of them I'm just going to be reading out and thinking, I don't know what that is. But on community right to buy, we'll take them, as I say, in groups of three. There's a question about the interaction with local government and how that works. Obviously, there's a sort of process at the moment that my understanding is quite different in different council areas. The interaction with that and what co-op councillors can do. I'll let Jim answer, and then I'll come in on that point as well. We've got a really interesting question, which is something that we've talked about before, about how this is different from levelling up. So we talked about levelling up being a sticker on the side of a bus, and Take Back Control being a sticker on the side of the bus, and even further back than that, there's Big Society and all that kind of stuff. How is this different from that? How is it different for a Labour government to be doing it? I've got some thoughts on that as well. But the next one was from this person here. I'm just going to read it out. How about one of our new towns being set up as a cooperative garden city like Mondragon in Spain? Someone was talking about that in a meeting I was in literally today. It's quite a long message, but basically says, Labour government has plans for the development of some new towns, targets on house building, Labour manifesto commitment on doubling the size of the co-op sector, economic growth, all of these kind of targets. Is there scope for, something to be based around co-op principles as is happened elsewhere in the world? We'll take those three. I'll go to Jim. I'll say a couple of thoughts, and then we'll go back for another round. Is that all right? So we'll take those three first.
So in terms of community assets, I mean, I'm going to completely contradict myself now because I'm going to go straight into examples of the emergency service response to saving something being lost, because I think that's generally where councillors, MPs do kind of mobilise, because you have such a finite time to do it. If you aren't the people stepping in to do it, the danger is that the community gets overtaken by the process and they miss that opportunity. So I know in my own community, we registered Boundary Park, which is a home of Oldham Athletic, now promoted. Good news. Because we recognised that actually the ownership was quite vulnerable. The supporter base was losing confidence in the club, and we registered it to give it that safeguard, and also to make sure that if there was going to be redevelopment of anywhere at the site, that the fans would have kind of be front and centre to it. So being honest, I think the listing of that was probably done less because the fans generally thought that they were going to club together and buy it. I think they just wanted to have power and to have say in the process, and that did give them that too, and that's just been extended. I think about the Daisyfield Inn, which is a local pub, again, that we registered as a community asset. That was due to be lost completely. It would have been the last pub essentially in this part of Oldham that would have gone completely. And we have a big issue in Oldham where the housing market actually has changed a lot. I think if you took about 10, 15 years, it wouldn't have been difficult to get anybody a house. Honestly, when I first became a councillor, this is a long time ago, but over 20 years ago, we could literally walk into the housing office and pick up keys and take people around to look at houses, not just a house to bid on alongside 100 other people, but we could say, well, you got this option here, quite nice, or you got this one across the road. Which one would you prefer? Well, fast forward now, and of course we don't have any of that. So I do think we need to think a bit differently about how we transition, I would say, and where we are. The rise in the housing crisis has meant a two-bed terrace house now is nearly £1,000 a month in Oldham, on a huge competition for HMO conversions. I'm saying that because when I think about the high street, in terms of retail spaces or office spaces or pubs, and when I think about community pubs or community facilities, even GP practices have closed in Oldham. We had 4 closed in my constituency under the previous government. 2 of them are HMOs. And what that's doing basically is to hugely inflate the value of these pubs. And a pub that might have been 150,000 to buy a few years ago, you're now looking at £300,000 to buy it. And I think there's something here where we do need to think about how are we making sure that poor regulation isn't having an impact on the market overall, that even if a community group has more power and more rights, that they are always on the back end and not able to generate the money to compete. So how would you compete for a community pub versus a conversion to HMO with a rent roll that's going to draw down? And I think there's a real challenge there about kind of placing this in the actual experience that people are going to face when they kind of go out to bat and try and save a local asset. But I do think councillors have that role to play, and we have done it. There is actually where if you have a willing owner, so there's a Catholic church on Fitton Hill, which is a council estate in Oldham, very strong community of like self-organised, usually women, I should say, who organise absolutely everything you can imagine from the community of the community. But its premise is poor. Like it really struggles to kind of fit everything they want to do. Like one shop unit in our town can be the clothes bank for women fleeing domestic violence as a New Start kit, to the luncheon club, to the food bank, to the you name it. It does everything. Well, now the Catholic Church that's been decommissioned was due to be demolished and sold. The church have agreed to allow us to kind of get together and try and get an umbrella organisation as a management committee of different interested parties to take it on. That actually is not an asset of community value, and we're not using this process because we have a willing owner who recognises that this is an important asset they want to help keep retaining the community, but the protection is still needed. In terms of how it's different to Levelling Up, I'll be honest, I personally thought that Levelling Up was a really good brand. I think it was completely tarnished by the lack of of any product behind it. But I think the principle of Levelling Up, actually people understand that when we talk about equalisation and everyone getting a fair crack, it's not about levelling down a part of the country, because you could equalise by levelling down. We don't want to do that, but people do get that every area should have the opportunity and the right to be able to level upwards. And so I think the principle was there, and I think actually quite a lot of the public would be able to repeat what levelling up was as a brand and as a slogan, even if they weren't able to point to an example in their area of what it was. And actually, I think that shows the degree of success. Oddly, we're sending more money out the door than I think has ever been in such a short space of time. Billions of pounds in terms of plan for communities, all the legacy stuff from the previous government, but kind of hardwired into community leadership. And there is something where, outside of individual funding strands, kind of what makes it more than the sum of its parts. And I do think, it's a personal view, but kind of Community Britain feels like it's there or thereabouts. Like there's something in there that I think is instinctive to where communities are. And it's not, maybe the danger is, and we should be honest about this, does it sound a bit big society? And I would say actually it's not, because what the big society was under Cameron was a complete deferral of responsibility. And what David Cameron says is austerity is going to carry on. You're going to lose even more. And if you can swim, you can swim. If you sink, you sink. That's the big society you need to marshal and rally around. This is not Community Britain. Community Britain is recognising that there's an ecosystem here of local leaders of the community, of first sector organisations, of voluntary groups and charities who will come together and actually kind of marshal that. And I think that is fundamentally different, and also I think a really good foundation. On the point of new towns, I can take that back. It's not a conversation that we've had, but it strikes me that it's a worthy conversation to have. And even if the new town itself wasn't a cooperative, I'm sure that in terms of infrastructure, there will be things being planned there in terms of community venues and magnets that we could look at. But that's, I'm also careful not to stray too far outside my own brief, but I'll certainly take that back.
Great. Yeah, that's fab. I'll say three really quick things on those. So that on councillors and community right to buy, we are about to embark on some work on what we can do as a party to be supportive of councillors that want to think about how to make the most of it, want to feed back to us on what needs to go back to Jim and the team. So we're gonna my colleague Gareth, who lots of you will know, who covers local government, is going to work with me on that. That's the first thing. On new towns, One of the asks of the co-op party sort of going forward is going to be about like how does the state support the community right to buy? Like, do there need to be civil servants working on co-op development and things like that? And I think that is where this would feed in quite well. Is sort of like, how do you apply like co-op principles and policies to across government basically, and that's kind of the area that's in, and it's great for Jim to take that back, and I'll do the same as well on Community Britain, levelling up, big society. I love this sort of stuff because I'm not a policy person, but I do comms and sort of language and branding and stuff, and the way I've always answered the question of how is it different is we have a line in Community Britain that says this, which is that big society and levelling up, exactly as Jim has said, was to an extent, especially big society, about government stepping back, and Community Britain is about government stepping forward. And it used to be, this is like insider gossip, it used to be called Building Community Britain, BCB, and we dropped building because what we learned as we were doing the project was that Community Britain already exists. It's about the state stepping up to support it. I'm going to stop yapping on because there's loads of questions. So I'm going to read some questions out from here. We've got a question here about Surrey, which is Robert's question. Conservatives are spending a great deal of money on a top-down plan which has very little support across the county. All the opposition parties oppose their plans, which, far from bringing people with us and empowering people, will breed resentment if they introduce two huge 600,000 councils. Apart from filling in the questionnaire, what can we do to get Labour's message across to you? I will leave that one with you, Jim, to come back to. I've got a question on rural council areas, which is really important. Has the bill been rural proofed? Our parish council is 10 miles across and 6 miles deep, 11 villages. Local government looks very different here than in an urban area. I know that's something Jim would have thought about, so I'll come back to that one. And I also have a question here. I'm actually going to do four. I have a question here about because they're sort of linked. Citizens' assemblies and the idea of powering up us, is citizens' assemblies sort of part of that? And linked to that is a question which is sort of similar, which says residents often feel that consultation exercises are tokenistic, results are just ignored in decision making. That's definitely something that I recognise. How can genuine community involvement in decision making be promoted? And I know that's something that you've got lots of thoughts on, Jim. So those three, and then if we have time, we'll do a final round at the end. But I definitely need to let Jim go by 7 because he's a very busy man. All right.
Yeah, I'll try and quick on my responses. On Surrey, so Surrey obviously has been accelerated. So we're now out to public consultation on the two options. I am the statutory decision maker on that, so will be making the final decision on it. So I can't talk about the options ahead of that, other than to say that obviously kind of community identity and belonging and new local authorities having an anchor that would make sense to people is not just important to me; it's part of the criteria, and so that is a really important part of that. Do make representations in that process. I can say, and I spend a lot of time doing this. I read all the submissions that come. I read all the reports, not to scan read, to properly understand where different areas are coming through. And obviously, because Surrey is the first of the 21 counties that are coming through reorganisation, we are testing some fairly significant things in terms of how do you balance that scale in terms of efficiency with identity and geography and having an anchor that makes sense, and all those other competing issues, as well as other bigger issues like the treatment of legacy debt liabilities, and which obviously in Surrey you'll be aware of. So do take part in that consultation, and don't just perceive it as, well, what's the point? It's just sending it into a vacuum. They absolutely do get read and will get read. On rural councils and whether we're rural proofing, I think in a way the kind of proof is in the pudding, because when and this actually did come a bit from Surrey and other places, who said, look, whatever we do here, we are going to go from smaller district councils to a larger unitary. Otherwise, there is no point in reorganisation, even if you disaggregate down from the county council and you meet somewhere in the middle. Would be kind of what would happen, I would imagine, in most places. But let's see what's put forward. And there was definitely a move for community governance reviews, where it was almost like the kind of the emergency lever that was pulled. Which is, if that's right, that's fine. You know, if there is a view that for our communities, new town and parish councils are the right approach, as a government, we would always say that's, if you believe it's right, then get on with it. But if that's being done in the absence of mainstreaming localism and community empowerment and community involvement, then there's a bigger question here to answer. And I think originally when we were kind of pondering the way to do it, probably me personally kind of went to area committees. One, I understood them from my Oldham context and from and that experience and valued them. You know, they were area committees, but actually at one point they were community councils in Oldham, and we use them far more in workshop settings where, you know, clearly not every meeting, but I can definitely think of meetings where we had 80 to 100 people attend, and we would be workshopping out how we sorted out ASB in the local park, and it was a proper community response to doing that, and I think it worked. But the more conversation that we had, I did feel as though if the spirit here is about creating a new model of cooperation, surely we should develop it in cooperation rather than me just going away and saying, hey, you know, hundreds of councils, here's what you're getting. And so we kind of stepped back from that and said, well, let's just in the legislation, just require that we all come forward with regulations, and let's spend the time to really work through what they could say in terms of the geography that they should cover and the community that they should cover. Small things like what should they be called, and just give a bit more flexibility for some places, like where I am now. Pre-1974, it would have been its own urban district council. It has a very strong township identity, even within Oldham, where there are 7 other town and rural districts that were brought together in 1974. For us, this would be a really good footprint that people would understand and would make sense. But if you try to overlay that into a rural community with a collection of villages, I think that would not achieve what we want to achieve, and more nuance and more localism might be required around some of that. I think there's a big piece of work here on what they, not just what they will do, but how they will do it, that is still to be answered. I'm going to defer, this is not kind of me delegating, but it's Alex Norris is our minister who covers communities, and he is doing a lot of thinking on the community strategy. And as much as I'm thinking about the structures to make sure that there is consistency and it holds, he'll be thinking a lot about, well, how do they do what they do? And that is almost more important in a way than some of the structural stuff that we'll do by necessity. So kind of watch out for that kind of wider community strategy and the work that Alex will do. And I know that Caitlin and Alex will be arranging different kind of events and speaking at different conferences or whatever as time goes on. I think that just come into a bit of the idea of the Citizens' Assembly about what is the interaction of local people. Is it after a decision has been made? Is it just asking them to be happy and grateful that something has happened? Or is it genuinely kind of starting with not quite a blank sheet of paper, but at least the frame, the skeleton that people can really build and feel like they've had a say in, I think is really important. I also think then what you produce and what you create, what you then hand it over to, I think becomes really important. Some of the best things I did as a ward councillor, it was getting investment in, but actually it was the residents associations that we built and community groups and the charities that we made with the community that then took on that resource and that power. And it lasted actually through the years of austerity when all else failed around it. It maintained, because when public services walk away because they've had no choice to through austerity, people still are there, aren't they? They still live in that community and they don't want to let go and just give up. And so I think that was a good. I think that probably comes on to the kind of genuine involvement point too. But that kind of opportunity, I think, for the movement to build something here is absolutely where we are. And I should say, Deputy Prime Minister, who's obviously my boss, and so I agree with everything that she says. But I agree particularly with when she talks about how we can't just do things to communities and expect that there'll be a different outcome. There is a hunger, maybe even a demand from communities for politicians to walk alongside them and to build things with them, not just do things to them. And so there's a very clear message that come right down from the top around what this needs to be and how it's got to feel and how it's got to be distinct from what went before. And that's the challenge that we're all kind of rising to at the moment.
Completely. Yeah, completely. I also completely agree with the Deputy Prime Minister. How about that? I think as well we'll definitely if there's appetite, we'll definitely do something similar with Alex on the community strategy as and when we get that. And I guess the other thing on sort of community involvement is there is a little bit of a direction of travel in the plan for neighbourhood stuff around those neighbourhood boards that are sort of directing funding rather than it, and that they're made up of all sorts of different people from the community as well as councillors and MPs, I think, as well. So there's like a clear direction of travel in terms of doing things differently, I think. I'm going to take one more round but it is going to be the last one. There's a question about metro mayors and their role in all of this. I know there's a whole section of the bill on combined authorities and metro mayors, but I think this question maybe is in relation to the communities piece, sort of like what's the role of metro mayors in doing that, and supporting that. And then we have a couple of questions on the council piece. How do we prevent the strategic authorities becoming a replica of the two-tier system that currently exists? And another question on community right to buy. This is about the high street. Labour members of my unitary council are campaigning for the unoccupied buildings on the high street, to own unoccupied buildings on the high street, I think. Could this be tied to the right to community ownership aspect? And I know there's a high streets piece to that as well. I think we'll go with those three. There's clearly like huge appetite for sort of questions to Jim. What we'll say, I think going forward is we're really lucky. We work really closely with Jim, and we will continue to on this bill. Poor Jim's going to be hearing from me constantly, and it's going to be great. Everyone, I'll pop my email in the chat, and people can feel free to get in touch with me, and we'll continue sort of feeding in. But I don't want to eat into everyone's evening, so I'll hand over to Jim on those three, and then we'll say some closing words, and we'll finish off. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So, I mean, in terms of the metro mayors, well, first of all, they are no longer metro mayors because we are building a model of government for our regions across England. And so obviously we now got, well, even actually before this round, we had mayors covering significant rural areas. North Yorkshire, I think, is one of the sparsest counties in the country, with a mayor in place covering York and North Yorkshire. We've just elected Greater Lincolnshire and Hull and East Yorkshire. We just agreed actually last week the priority programme, where we have announced elections to take place next year for new regional mayors, as we now call them, in Norfolk and Suffolk, in Essex, in Hampshire and the Solent, and in Sussex, and then the year after in Cheshire and Warrington and in Cumbria. I mean, that's significant. It leaves basically Lancashire as a one county in the north of England, not yet covered, but they will come forward in autumn for that. With a fair wind, we could get to the end of Parliament and have the whole of the north of England covered by regional government. And I think that is significant in terms of rebalancing where power sits in this country as they begin to kind of work and marshal as a pack. And I do think, and there are some political complexities in that, clearly. It's a bit like local government, really. We had the Leaders' Council this week. I'm losing track of time, but it was this week. Which is cross-party. It takes in all the group leaders from the LJ, and that's Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrat, Reform, Independents, you name it, and other members. And we just talk about the issues. And party politics doesn't come into those conversations when you're talking about the big issues in terms of social care or housing or transport investment, or you can name it, really. So I think there is a bit here where I do hope and expect that local authorities and their mayors will work together for the place and its people. And if they don't, I think the people in the place see that, and I think they can make their own mind up. Why is all that important? Because mayors can do a lot, and they do a lot. And I think in Greater Manchester, I do think we have the benefit of a mayor that has impact, but they can't do it alone. There is no mayor who would ever say that they've achieved what they've achieved through their own endeavours alone. They have to have their local authorities working alongside them wherever they are, or else they can't do it. And I kind of split out, I suppose, our mayors being that kind of maybe a bigger leader of the place in terms of visibility and being the route to government to make the case. And that's definitely working through the mayoral council. They now sit in the Council of Nations and Regions with the Prime Minister. We've completely elevated regional government in England to have that national position. But the delivery arm and actually making change happen on the ground and reforming public services and aligning public services at a place-based level and a neighbourhood level that they make sense to the population, not just for the institutions, is very much where we see councils coming into that. And then think about the type of powers that they have around the mayoral development corporations. Many of them will be the police commissioner and also responsibility for fire services. They have the growth agenda, and that also includes strategic housing as well. So there's a lot here where the how they then do the politics becomes really important. because all the huge, you know, seismic decisions in some communities that will change not just how public services are being delivered, but how some places will even look and feel. And I think for local people, they would definitely want to have some power in that. I don't. I definitely accept there is always a risk of mission creep, and governments have got long histories of it. But we are really clear that we want guardrails. So we do not want strategic authorities to be focusing as a two-tier system. So by way of an example, a practical example, we're obviously going to disaggregate out adult social care and children's services because they, as a county councils go to unitaries, there will be more unitaries than there were county councils at the end of it. Now, if we allow the disaggregation of adult services and children's services, but without investment and reform, the system will not hold. And we are ambitious, actually. We've got capital coming out the door for residential children's homes. We are sick and tired of the private sector providing worse outcomes and providing, tens of thousands of pounds of premium on top per child for the privilege. We think but rebuilding local authority residential homes is the right way forward in terms of cost and outcomes for the young people. It's reasonable to say to councils at a county level, well, why don't you work together on a social care cluster partnership arrangement? But the power is held by the unitary authorities. It's not being given up to a trust. It's not being given up to the strategic authority. It's the councils as the first among equals who are working together. And I think they could do that on adult social care in terms of, say, dementia care or specialist support or complex adults, where they, of course, hold the ring as a council with their own sovereignty, but they just recognise that they are stronger when they work together and they collaborate and they co-produce and the rest of it. And actually, when it works, it will look and feel a bit different in different areas because it's for local areas to decide what's right in their context. And that then frees a strategic authority to think about growth, not just growth in terms of building stuff, where we can all build stuff, but that kind of inclusive growth where people genuinely feel that their area is improving and their life chances are improving. And I think if we can meet the test of raising living standards that people have security in their household income, and we can improve local areas that people have security in their neighbourhoods, I think we'll get a hearing. And our mayors actually, in terms of that growth agenda being felt everywhere, is really important. And there are loads of examples of where mayors are doing that. And then finally, on the so that regional footprint is a key. On the high streets, which is a huge issue, I think we ought not to kind of discount some, what I would say, almost like lighter touch interventions. I think one, the power to use the plan for communities as a bit of a kind of the crumbs to bring people around the table. And there will be areas coming forward, no doubt, that will say we want to use some of that money to improve the look of our high street, the shop fronts and the rest of it. That could be enough in some cases to get the landlord to, well, actually, maybe I need to do a bit to the inside to get a tenant in to make it a success. If they don't want to do that and some just will not engage, maybe they don't live in the town or the city and they haven't got that investment, maybe they've got too many other things on, and there's plenty of examples of that. Not to discount things like the high street rental auctions powers. Again, Alex Norris in our team is doing that work as well, alongside the community right to buy work are all part of those component parts as well. And to say that with the investment that is coming through our department, of course, revenue is an important part of that. We need to pay people to actually do the job of work, but also capital is a significant part of that. There is money in the funds that are coming through to actually buy assets and turn them into a community asset in that collaborative way. So I think there's quite a lot there. But as I said, there are proposals here. If they can be tightened, improved, if the next stage, this is the start of the ambition, I should say. This is not the ceiling. This is very much a start of a 10, and I'm sure it will adapt and evolve over time.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim. I hope it's not too soppy to say that I think we are really, really lucky to have such a champion in Jim as the minister and as our chair. It's like, it's such a special thing to see, this ambition and campaigning work over so many years actually happening. It's a really, we shouldn't underestimate that. So loads of ideas on the chat tonight. Loads of people have messaged me. As Jim has said, I think that's actually a really important piece. It's not the ceiling of the ambition. It's like the beginning of a process. Those of you that have like maybe worked on legislation before know it's a journey. And I'm really excited for it. I think it's going to be a really exciting and inspiring thing to work on, and we will continue to engage with members throughout that process. So it'll kick off in September. Second of September, as Jim said, is most likely to be the second reading, and it'll all go from there. And so members will hear from us on all of that. If you're a councillor, you'll hopefully get specific stuff as well around all of this. And yeah, please do always send us through your ideas. Thank you all so much for your time, and thank you, Jim, for your time as well. Jim's speaking to us on the first day of parliamentary recess, in the middle of loads of other work, so we really do appreciate it. And I will see you all soon. Speak later. Thank you. Bye.